I'm going to start with just a couple of minutes on history and rapidly zoom up to the present time. So don't be alarmed that we're going back so far. Right. Why does that change? It's not changing. Okay, did that change for you then?
Yes.
Okay, jolly good. So I graduated in 1973 from Manchester University. Um, and I was actually my course was actually in this building, although I'd never heard of Alan Turing then, and the blue plaque arrived later. So in my 52 years in the business, it does sometimes lead to some nostalgia, but I certainly welcome many of the dramatic and numerous innovations that I've seen in the last 52 years. And although the 1970s were an exciting time, I would not want to go back. We can do so much more now. So at Manchester, they taught me Algol 60, and this is what it looked like, and it was the first um, program language to use these buildings of um, sequence, looping, and selection, if then else things. And it's called structured programming. There was a book about it that was published um, the year before in 1972. And many languages have built on this since. It was a really great place to start. But at my first job, after I graduated, they sent me on a 6-week COBOL course, and this is what COBOL looks like. COBOL was a well-intentioned but misguided language. It sought to be English, um, and therefore to make programming possible for a wider variety of people. We're still hearing that story today, but actually it doesn't work. Um, Things did get more difficult, and this, I will agree, is very cryptic. It's the ICL 1900 assembler, because I went on to learn that, and I got a job porting a simple database system from IBM assembler to ICL 1900. So IBM had a 32-bit word, ICL had a 6-bit word, a 24-bit word for 6-bit characters. So capital letters only, and a lot of other kind of architectural differences. So we managed to get the job done and added multi-user capability and multi-threaded code, locking, logging, transactions, and recovery. You wouldn't get a database without that these days. And the product was successful, selling over $1 million in its first year, which was 1983, when $1 million was quite a lot of money. But I certainly would not recommend that approach now. And in fact, at that time, it became clear to me that this was a very long-winded way to develop software. And I campaigned in the company to make the move to the C programming language, which is very similar to Algol. And it was a campaign with some help from some of the other engineers. And they did finally make the change. So a great relief to a lot of people, I think. So these days, my preferred language is Java. It has some drawbacks, as you can, as I illustrated here. But I can write things the way I want to, and it has SQL support. Just to be clear, I mean, this slide is not a criticism of the Java language, but in the way it is often used. I see that Python is the most popular language now, just ahead of Java, but I like it. The simplification, it's going back to the COBOL idea now, make it simple and easy to read. Simplification of Python using indentation rather than curly brackets or begin-end blocks to delimit blocks of code seems too fragile to me. And most Python developers have come across problems with tabs and spaces where you can't see accurately where your indentation is. So why put that fragility in? It seems silly. That may seem like a rather picky aside, but the attempt to make typing easier and to pretend that precise structures are not necessary is the same kind of mistake that's been made in everything from COBOL to ChatGPT. Programmers need to understand what they are doing, and that's the difficult bit. We need to be precise. We need to be fluent in typing so that we can type our programs, but it isn't difficult. And the programming languages are actually, although they, from the examples you've seen, if you're not a programmer, those probably looked, the Algol, COBOL, and assembler. If you're not a programmer, those look really kind of weird and unfriendly. But actually, they're pretty simple languages. It's not the complexity of a natural language. And it isn't difficult to learn. The difficult bit is understanding what problems we're trying to solve. So now moving rapidly through the last 50 years, what has been good? Well, there have been many improvements in the tools we use. The Windows, icons, menus, and pointer interface developed at Xerox PARC really did change the way we work. I don't know how many of you will even remember the time before that, but it was a huge leap forward. That Xerox PARC Palo Alto Research Center also gave us Unix, Java, Ethernet, laser printers, and other important innovations. There have, of course, been other innovators, but they were really outstanding. What I enjoy with all this stuff is that became available in Korea is delivering a well-engineered product that its users like and trust. This may be by myself or with a small team. Working in a small team is the best. And these innovations have made such working environments much more productive. Again, moving through the last 50 years, what has been not good? The top few are attempts to improve the technical environment to make it easier. Those listed have failed to do that and have instead caused huge inefficiency, waste of resources, and in the case of blockchain, vast environmental and social damage. Large language models are chasing blockchain in a race to maximize environmental damage. The next little group, cookies and the like, have enabled surveillance capitalism. I'll refer to the book of that title later on. But what they've done is to make social media more addictive and then manipulated people using it for corporate profits. Social media can be a good thing. Locally, we have groups that support individuals with shared interests from knitting to music to environmental action and refugee support. But what Cory Doctorow calls, you've probably heard this recently, Enshittification is rife. It's fouling what for many of us has been a joyous opportunity to build useful things and make incremental improvements on our world. And then the last four conspire to change computing from a tool to make the world better into a means of maximizing inequality, the extent that a handful of rich individuals have more wealth than the poorest 50% of the world population put together. This is bad for everyone, including the super rich, whose addiction to extreme wealth is surely, in my opinion, a form of mental illness. So why is there such a list of bad things? I think there are some things in the nature of software development that have had unanticipated consequences. For most products like those pictured here, There is a significant design phase. I mean, for the car, it's millions of pounds and many months, sometimes years. For the coffee maker, it'll be less, and for the banjo, you can pretty much pick up a pattern of one that was made before if you're building banjos, um, plus a bunch of skill to make it work. But there is still a design phase, and that costs a lot of money, and you're not getting paid for anything while it's being done. But for products like these, the manufacturing costs are significant as well. It costs, once you've designed the car, it costs a lot to build it. Um, there is a wonderful banjo builder in the west of Canada whose banjos sell for £5,000, so they're not all as expensive as that. In contrast, once the software product is built, making another copy of the product costs almost nothing. We stick it on a website, and the main problem is get people to pay for it before they can download it. And because it's so cheap to do, produce that volume, then there's a huge amount of profit potentially in that volume. Paid off the development costs is almost pure profit, apart from marketing. um, the value of web products, though, is difficult for technology managers to assess. In my experience, they often do not trust the opinions of their technical staff, even if those staff have delivered good systems in the past. They think that one person cannot understand both strategic advantages and technical benefits. In fact, I think there are a lot of people who. But technology managers do trust Gartner, Forrester, and software salespeople from big tech. So the vendors target the managers with their marketing. The vendors lie about capabilities. I'll give some examples, actual lies, and they sneak in extra costs after the customer has committed. This sounds like an extreme, even hysterical statement, and it took some severe shocks to get me to this point. So vendors sell to managers unquantifiable concepts. When I took sales training, I did go to the dark side for a short period of time, less than a year. I was taught, don't talk to the techies. Use terms like AI-driven insights, business agility, agile, competitive advantage. This one's amazing. Up your DevOps game. Disruptive, trailblazer, pioneer, and our customers derive great benefit. Well, there are some wonderful open source products and free products, and there are some small agile outfits doing good bespoke projects which do deliver benefits to their customers at a reasonable price. But for big tech, which dominates everything, it is all about profit and nothing about the many things that might bother us. Of course, that's how they became big. And now that they have become big, they have a very dangerous excess of wealth and power. In this diagram, I've listed some of the things that are important to me on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side are the opposites of those. Uh, yeah, these things that don't work so well. And I've put some of the products I work with in there, and you'll notice that the ones on the left, well, I'm going to talk some more about those as being the worst offenders. So we'll start this thing with Microsoft Dynamics 365. I've contact with several of these projects. I worked for a couple of years alongside one that was being implemented, and I worked for another with a team of people who were trying to make the thing that had been implemented work. If you look at the promotional video for Microsoft Dynamics 365, it's finishes with this slide. And you see this romantic vision of walking off into the sunset with no limits. In fact, there are many limits in dynamics. These are the ones that they publish. You can go and look them up on Microsoft's website. The first one that got me, so I was working on data warehouse projects mostly, and they're going to be the sum of several other systems in the organization, and they're typically going to be quite big. Big, as in, I'll mention one specifically later on that was about 50 gigabyte database. That's not really big, is it? I mean, you fit it on your laptop easily. You can fit it on a memory stick. But people in those kind of organizations probably have data scientists, data analysts, and they ask them to do quite complex queries. And it's quite reasonable to have a query that runs for more than 5 minutes. Microsoft used to limit this to a certain number of words, but lots of people complained about that, so they changed it to an equally bad one, but just measuring time instead of data volume. So that's one limit. TDS is tabular data stream, which is sort of SQL-like, with lots of bits missing, interface to the Dataverse, which is Microsoft's storage structure. And your queries time out in this thing after 5 minutes. So there's lots of things you can't do. Then there are entitlement limits. And these are the limits that represent the number of requests users are entitled to make each day. Now you'd think, well, I would have thought you've paid a load of money for this system and a load more to have it implemented. Your users ought to better use it all the time. But no, if they run too many queries, then they'll get blocked. Service protections. This suggests to me that there's a lot of sharing going on their cloud systems, and they talk about protecting users against one another in case somebody's hogging all the power. But really, if it's such a powerful, scalable system, that shouldn't be an issue. But they do put limits in there. And bandwidth pricing. If you decide you want to data out of the Dataverse and put it into another database like a data warehouse, it's very, very restrictive. And if you do manage to transfer data, then you have to pay for it. So lots of limits there. How can they say no limits? They talk about it being scalable as well, but it really isn't. I'm going to put some numbers on that on the next slide. But it also has very limited functionality. There's some that link, which you of course can't click on there because it's on my screen. But I can give you the link if you want it. Is in the Microsoft documentation telling you what things in the TDS don't work, what things in Transact SQL don't work in TDS. It's a subset, and that subset is an understatement. So this scalability. On the left is the actual data model we used in the data warehouse for a pretty significant charity in the UK. They get about 40 million in donation and grants every year. They employ about 200 people. They had a 50 gigabyte database running on a really old Oracle system, and they wanted to upgrade it. So that was good. In fact, they had two systems running, and we combined those both into this model for the data warehouse, and then loaded that from the old systems and people ran queries on it. We'd done all that work and rationalized what was there and avoided having to deal with a very old Oracle system. Um, they decided that they would use that database as the input, the sole input of this organization's data into Dynamics. And we got some big shocks when we did this. First of all, our data model was 50 gigabytes. The same data in Dynamics produced a database of 500 gigabytes. To add, and well, 734 tables. You can see why I didn't put the names and the relationships in there. It's also had over 8,000 relationships. We had 130 in ours. But we were paying £90 a year for the database to run our data warehouse, and the same data in Dynamics. Not only was it much bigger, but they charged £30. This is a special charity rates from a couple of years ago, so it's probably gone up since then. £30 per gigabyte per month. It was going to cost £181,000 a year. So the charity decided to prune their data, get rid of the old stuff, which probably wasn't a bad idea, although some of the researchers always wanted to go back the full 26 years. I never thought that really helped. So I didn't mind losing some of the old data, but they had to do it to do this to get the cost down to 100,000 a year. And you don't get a choice. You have to use, if you're using Dynamics, you have to use the data first. So I had a conversation with the IT director and explained to him how much it was going to cost and that I thought it wasn't a good idea. And he said, no, I can live with that. I don't think many donors would have been pleased to hear that they're throwing away 100,000 a year. So let's go on to the next. So when people look for certainly customer relationship management systems, CRM systems, and I believe quite a lot of the others in the suites that are offered by Microsoft and Salesforce, they look at those two companies. And as you can see, Salesforce isn't very popular with its users. They, of course, used to use Oracle, which is a respectable SQL database. Not my favorite. The company is not my favorite, but it works as a SQL database. So Salesforce decided to move from that to what they call data cloud, and this is what their product and industries marketing EVP said. When you're constrained to Oracle as your underlying storage mechanism, you're going to run into things like it's not really great for unstructured data. It's not really great for trillions of records. It's not great for objects that have thousands of fields. Well, there are very, very few organizations in the world that are even close to having 1 trillion records. I think the NHS may get there soon. But that is the biggest employer in the UK. And probably with the biggest number of users or customers, if you like. So for most businesses, 1 trillion records is just silly. You're not gonna have that. Now, unstructured data means data that comes in large lumps with some internal structure, like sound files, like video files, like large text files, like XML documents. Those are the things that are bread and butter for search engines and social media products, who collect masses and masses of unstructured data, much more than 1 trillion records. and use it to convince advertisers to part with vast sums of money to target customers identified by this mess that they've collected. Organizations using the main applications of databases are dealing with data about customers, financial transactions, products, service tickets, all highly structured data that needs to be reliable and accurate. We'll say some more about unstructured data when we get to artificial intelligence. So for users of a customer relationship management system, which is going to be tracking who your customers are, names and addresses, when did they last contact you? When did you last contact them? What have they bought from you, or what donations have they made, or what interactions have they had with you? You want to know those things at specific dates, specific values. That is structured data. A CRM is a completely inappropriate product for an unstructured data organization. Essentially, most users will be better served by structured data in a mature, high performance, high reliability data store, a relational database. If something better comes along, I'll be an early adopter, but there is no sign of anything to match it yet for structured data. Anyway, I was talking about Salesforce and their pricing. So having talked about trillions of records, their starter pack is for 3 million data rows. Their growth pack, 20 million data rows. And then anything bigger than that requests about 100 million data rows. That charity I talked about had 230 million records, and we reloaded them into the data warehouse every day. 230 million is not, it's not a lot. There aren't enough price points on here to work out what a trillion row database might cost, but if you extrapolate this, and it doesn't make any mathematical sense to do this really, but it looks like the price per million rows halves every time volume increases by three times. So this would drop the price per million rows from £800 to 12.5 pence if it continued like that. I doubt if it does, but if it did, then that would cost you £12 million per month for 1 trillion rows. I don't know many organizations that would pay for that. So why have Microsoft and Salesforce moved to their own proprietary data management tools? What they say is AI. The actual benefits they achieve are stronger account control because it's their proprietary data storage. It doesn't work with any standard tools. They discourage the use of any standard tools. They're locking you into that system. They're charging a lot more for it than you would pay for a relational database. The best one is free. And it's always on the cloud. So that means they have access to customers' data. Hopefully they don't look at it, but they have access to it. So I mentioned Gartner as being the go-to source of information about what software you should buy. And despite all these problems with Microsoft and Salesforce, many projects fail with these two products. I spoke to a very good consultant who's been associated with many of these things, not in the choice of product, but in the implementation. And I said to him, so how many of these actually succeed? And he said, oh, less than half of them. That was for Dynamics. So being up there at the top right-hand corner of the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, what does that mean? Gartner is not a reliable authority. They make 5.9 last year, they made $5.9 billion out of being a so-called authority, but they're not a reliable authority. They do not test products. It's not like Which magazine that will test 10 irons and tell you which one blows up and which one burns his shirt and which one's not hot enough. They don't test things. They review the marketing materials, which are much less than true. So the Gartner reports are works of fiction. Now, in 2009, a company called ZL in England, if you like, but ZL Technologies sued Gartner for not giving a fair assessment of ZL's product. Gartner's defense in court was that its reports are based on pure opinion, which apparently legally means opinions that are not based on fact. So this Gartner, Gartner, oh dear. Um, I like this cartoon, Geek and Poke. There are a lot of folks, friends of Gartner, and we know who they are. The senior managers rely on Gartner to give their decisions some credibility. When you hear them talking to one another, they'll to put on a very serious face and talk about the Gartner reports. And that is much easier than doing a proper evaluation, but it leads to very many very bad decisions. And Gartner recommendations are completely dominated by big tech. So Gartner is a key player in recommending inappropriate products that cost businesses, government departments, and charities billions. Okay, leave Gartner for a while. Blockchain. In 2020, I gave a talk at BCS meeting in Canterbury about blockchain systems. At that time, NFTs, DAOs, and smart contracts were not in the mainstream, but already some of us knew that blockchain were extraordinarily wasteful of energy, and some of us knew that they served no useful purpose, no useful legal, ethical purpose. So this picture shows a previously abandoned coal mine in Pennsylvania that was reopened to use coal waste to power Bitcoin mining machines. This is the dirtiest kind of fuel and produces large amounts of carbon dioxide and other pollutants. Musk's new data center will probably put this in the shade in terms of energy use and probably pollution too. So blockchain systems are used mostly to run so-called cryptocurrencies, and now crypto is what people talk about rather than blockchain. It's odd because the blockchain is not encrypted and Bitcoin is not a currency. But anyway, crypto, there we go. So Bitcoin alone uses more electricity than Poland. There's a really good, there's a couple of really good websites. There's Digiconomist and the Cambridge blockchain energy something. And they track this, and it really is frightening the amount of power that's being used, but also the cost of the transactions. You can do 6,000 Visa transactions for the cost of doing one blockchain transaction. And also it's going to take quite a few seconds. If people were using cryptocurrency in a supermarket, there'd be some really leaves at the checkout. Whereas Visa can do it in 2 seconds typically. So if you've been following the news, you will be aware of the corruption and criminality which is facilitated by crypto. What's happening in America with crypto and the enrichment of a corrupt president is really shocking, but very well documented. And that's what it's for. You don't use it for buying things. Okay, artificial intelligence. When I went to work in California in 1983, I was very excited because I was going to California, and I'd grown up in Kent, and only been to France a couple of times. Well, I was very excited also because the technical lead there was known for his use of artificial intelligence in the database system that my employer sold. So when I met this tech hero, I found out that the artificial intelligence was used to automatically correct mistyped system commands. To do this, he used the Soundex algorithm, which I was already familiar with. It was actually patented in 1918 and developed by Donald Knuth in The Art of Computer Programming in 1973. It can be a useful thing, but it's not artificial intelligence. My disappointment was mitigated by the California sun, scenery, and seafood, but I was very disappointed by my former. Since then, of course, systems have become much more capable. Navigation, for example, is an amazing achievement. Uh, it's it it gets it wrong sometimes. I've seen a couple of signs recently which says "Do not follow sat nav because there are roadworks here." But generally, for a long, I was driving from Faversham in Kent to a little village in Cumbria, uh, and it didn't let me down at all. And I didn't have to keep stopping and looking at the map and make sure I was in the right place. So it is brilliant. I worked on a vehicle tracking system for insurance. They gave bonuses for uh, good driving characteristics and also um, limited use of your car. So like 6,000 miles a year, which isn't very much for a lot of people. Anyway, um, but to do that, we had a tracker in the car and it was using the satellite system, GPS system, to record where the cars were. And also we could work out how fast they were going, if they were in a speed limit zone, uh, all kinds of useful stuff. And working on that system was really interesting because of what could be done with the GPS technology, plus the online mapping technology as well. Put the two together, it's really. So that's nobody seems to have called that artificial intelligence, but I thought that was pretty clever. Mostly these days it's used to mean LLMs, large language models. And all the hype from the big tech, the massive investments, and Musk's expensive data center, and they're all doing it now as well, are large language models, and using vast amounts of energy and water, and that is a great cost. The other problem with them is that they're unreliable. Oh, I've got a slide in a moment. Yeah, I'll save it for that. We'll come back to that. The third point on this slide, diminishing the ability for critical thinking, that was actually it was a study sponsored by Microsoft, and I'm impressed that they let it be published because they took knowledge workers and divided them into two groups. One lot used AI, large models in particular, and the other lot didn't. And they found after several months of this that people who were working without AI would check their sources. Is this a credible source? Does it match some other source? Other credible source? Are there any credible sources that counter this? And all the things that you would do to apply your critical thinking to assess whether the information you're being given is reliable. Should you make your decision based on this, or is it just made up? Well, quite often with LLMs, it's just made up. The interesting thing with the group who used the LLMs was that they tended to accept the LLM's answer, and they became less able to do the kind of research that would validate what they were hearing, what they were reading. Hopefully, after another few months, they'd have kind of regained that ability. It's a habit that a set of habits that um, can be learned and I'm sure could be recovered. So hopefully that that research wasn't unethical in that way. But it's really important that we don't rely on these things. It's also built on stolen data. Um, and the biggest problem is that it's a marketing silver bullet. Everyone's talking about marketing their AI systems. Noticed with uh, some of the product brochures and videos and stuff, things that didn't mention AI suddenly started mentioning AI. They hadn't had time to build all that stuff. They were just, it's something we can sell. And that's why I believe it is a bubble. And there are people far more qualified than me who would agree with that. It can do some amazing things. Oh, and also the non-LLM stuff, a lot of stuff in medical research, scanning, um, analyzing body scans and things like that. Um, I can believe that uh, can help a lot, a great deal. And of course, it's a lot cheaper than LLMs as well. So this is the case, and I heard another similar one just this week. Um, but Michael Cohen, who was a lawyer, um, said he accidentally gave his lawyer fake legal citations that were made up by an artificial intelligence program. He got caught. That didn't do his case any good, and it's happened again, actually. So don't trust this stuff. And really, the big thing for me is don't wreck the planet to get more and more of it. Um, this was a great talk. You can get it online. This woman is now an assistant professor at Trinity College Dublin, and she did some really good work on AI. She presented this about it's over a year ago, I think it was, and it was really it's really worth watching. It will make you be careful, I think. Um, the next point uh, is more big tech marketing. So this is from a government website, and they're actually apparently proud of the fact they're using Google and Microsoft in ed tech. They have a quote from one teacher who said, the children, will have to use Microsoft when they go to work, so they might as well learn it now. Can you imagine how ecstatic that made the Microsoft marketing people? Well, I'm not the only one who thinks we shouldn't be handing it over to them. There was a very good article by John Norton, who writes in the Observer and is also a professor at Cambridge. And I think it was one of his children who came home and showed him what he'd been learning at school. So they went straight out to the Raspberry Pi shop and bought a proper computer and his child started learning programming. We don't want to be teaching school kids to use Microsoft Word. It's oh dear. Anyway, so there are much more interesting things to learn. The big tech companies, which typically gave us great products in their early days. I was so excited when I got my first Apple Mac in 1984. I mean, that was wonderful. Um, and when first found you could do a Google search or use Google Maps or buy stuff with Amazon. I don't do much of any of that anymore. There are other ways. Because they gave us great products in their early days and they've turned into monopolistic control freaks. They want to control us when we use their products. their leaders have become billionaires, some well, centi-billionaires, somebody all of those, aren't they? And they're now using that money to exert political influence to increase their wealth and power further. Some people have started to notice as these books, The Attention Merchants, 2017 was the first one I read that explained what was going on. And then The Age of Surveillance Capitalism on the bottom left, which I mentioned at the beginning. It's hard to read, but it's very thoroughly researched and very, very strongly argued. And then, well, these were all good. Goliath's mostly about the monopoly aspect of those. The one at the top right, Power and Progress, written by Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics last year. And they explain very clearly how what's happening with the big tech companies and why it's not good. What one of these? Oh no, it wasn't one of these. It was somebody else. It was Jan Ikut, who looked at how markups have changed in companies over the last 44 years. So the median markup has stayed the same, but the lower half, the ones below median, their markups have halved. They are having to work twice as hard to get the same profit. But the top 10% have doubled their markups. And can you imagine a markup on software of 44%? It really is excessive. And yeah, it makes Amazon look almost normal, doesn't it? 9% markup wouldn't be so terrible, but the top 10% are all those big tech companies. When I first wrote this presentation, I've updated it a bit, but I left this slide as it was because it's interesting to see how it's compared with where we are now. So the USA was being very active in pursuing bad behavior by the big tech companies. The Securities and Exchange Commission had 232 cases, including the big one, which was FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, who's now in prison. The FTX, Federal Trade Commission, FTC, sorry, FTC, Federal Trade Commission was looking at Google, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI, mostly about monopoly type situations. Oh, most of the SEC ones were about cryptocurrency. In the EU, Apple, Google, Microsoft have all come under the legal framework of the EU to minimize the harm done by monopolies. And in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority has charged one person with operating illegal crypto ATMs. Well, good. I'm glad they did that, but really, we were behind. Unfortunately, the US situation has pretty much collapsed because Mr. Trump likes crypto and has received lots of money from them. Okay, so that's all pretty gloomy. I'm sorry. It's real, but there are many people doing good work and there are opportunities to shift the balance of power. So some things that have been good. The Agile Manifesto, that gets misinterpreted as well, but it was a really good thing. And if you go on to the next page, this is the front page of the Agile Manifesto website, you get these 12 principles of which explain the four main things on the front. Um, I grade out one word. There's one word I don't like in this whole thing, and that's competitive, because not all software is about competitive advantage. Um, I I worked on systems for analyzing diabetic cases and providing groups of diabetics for further research. I worked on railway systems where it was all about safety. Um, you could, I suppose, say that's competitive because if the railways crash a lot, then people will go by bus instead, but or use their cars. But really, the focus was on safety. It wasn't about competition. Police systems as well. Library systems. So competitive advantage isn't everything. We're not here necessarily to maximize shareholder value. Some of us have got other good goals. So I commend the Agile Manifesto to you, and especially page 2. Go to page 2 and find the principles. Um, Agile projects, Scrum, which has the guys behind it are good. The ideas behind it are good, but it's got far too many artifacts and names for that's just a few of them. There are loads more than that. And it does tend to attract people who like producing artifacts because they're a lot easier than writing code and writing program code, and of course harder to test. But you know, you can do all these things and say what a lot of work you've done. Um, Another unfortunate thing that happened to Scrum was Microsoft adopting it and calling it Scrum. Um, and uh, one of the inventors of Scrum, Ken Schwaber, who was one of the people in the Agile Manifesto group, um, complained about it and complains that the Microsoft version has misunderstood some key Scrum and Agile concepts. And then the thought path Microsoft is following continues the old path of people being micromanaged, interchangeable rules. And having worked on some Microsoft-driven projects, that's certainly true. It's not a good way to work. Sorry, I said I was going to be positive. Education and training. You know, it's a challenge to keep up. Uh, I was reading documentation today that I've never seen in my whole career, but you know, I needed to read it today. You have to keep on learning, and you cannot learn everything. And learning how to assess good products, assess new technologies would be a really key thing. I think I got a bit of that because of what they taught us at Manchester, you know, learning Algol, and that was only half the course. Um, and that enabled me when I came along to COBOL and assembly, I thought, there's a much better way of doing writing programs. So we could be teaching people things like that. But you know, the new people will still have to learn things. That's a bit I've missed. So I have found that there is some good education and training out there. So in the charity, it started off with just two of us, the project manager who was there before, project leader, and me as a volunteer. And we recruited some more people. The people we got were all aged between 25 and 30. They'd all got degrees, computing related degrees. They were eager to learn. They worked hard. They'd come up with good ideas. You know, I was there as the guy with 50 years experience to say, well, this is probably the best way of doing that. And they challenge me sometimes and say, but what if we did this? And sometimes I say, I never thought of that. I've never come across it. It sounds brilliant. Let's do it. They were a wonderful team to work with, and that kind of interchange of people with slightly different backgrounds, but with a good technical knowledge. If you put it all together, you get much better systems. So I think that's a really good thing when that happens. Yeah, I mentioned this. There are good products. There are some very good products out there, but uh, let the people who are skilled in this stuff choose. Don't leave it to the managers who get schmoozed by the big tech people and read their Gartner reports. Of course, those big companies hate open source products and internal teams or small external development companies because they can be so much more efficient. So I'll finish up with my big question, the thing that I struggle with all the time is how can we get our managers and some of our technical people to see through the poor quality and massive cost of many of the big tech products? So I'll leave you with that question, and you can ask me lots of questions and disagree, and we'll talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. That was really good and very interesting. I think there was a comment from somebody saying rather scary, and I'd agree with that. So, does anybody have any questions?
I haven't got a question, I've got a comment. I got involved with computing for my sins back in 1958, when as a 10-year-old I found a children's reference book telling me how the Leo computer came into existence. And I spent the next few years telling everybody I wanted to work with computers and getting the answer, what's a computer? We're going back very early, and I grew up in County Durham, which was the next problem I had. Anyway, I managed to get to a technical college to study computing. Unfortunately, there's a family history of asthma, which I very cleverly inherited. I did 2 of a 3 years course, and I knew the last term something was wrong. I collapsed when I got home and found myself in hospital because I'd been living in a damp flat and I was allergic to damp mould, and I did not get my degree completed, which I've been really peeved about ever since. However, I had joined the British Computer Society as a student, which was the only thing that saved me. There were jobs in the Northeast for trainee programmers. Yes, I passed the aptitude test. No, I didn't get the job because I was a woman. A job centre came along and said, you know, banks are getting computers. Well, the magazine from the BCS said, make mainframes in headquarters. So what? We've got you a job in a bank. The local TSB wanted me as a trainee cashier. So I started looking at the jobs in the magazine and rang one up. Took the day off work, got the train to London, came home and told my parents that I'd got a trainee programming job. And my dad said, where? And I said, Northwest 10. And he said, that's the wicked city. And I said, if you're talking London, yes, and I'm going. Apparently, I'm a bloody minded woman. I don't care. Unfortunately, I've been down there a few years, and yes, I had learned Plan and Fortran at college. I had to learn COBOL for the job. And everything was fine. And then we had a domestic tragedy back in the Northeast, and I had to go home. And I'm back in the jungle where a woman is actually intended to cook, clean, and reproduce for the shipbuilders and the coal miners. And I was told categorically that they wouldn't promote me because they didn't think I was capable. So I job hunted, and I now live in Lancashire, where everything was fine for a few years until I wanted to move out of programming and into analysis. And I hit the same problem. So I ended up working freelance, and as a baby boomer, I stopped working when I was 60, which is actually 17 years ago. I've been watching what's happening with AI, and I keep thinking, I'm very well aware that we've got data out there in the public domain. I'm thinking of the NHS mainly, where man and woman are not treated equally. When they started developing drugs, they discovered women had this hormone problem, which wasn't very good. So drugs weren't tested on women. You look at a car, it's built for a man. I know someone who sat in the back seat of her parents' car. Some idiot ran into the front of the car, and her parents got out of the front with no damage. But because of where the seat belt fell on her body, her hips were smashed because the seat caters for a man's hips. So, yes, I haven't had much contact other than sitting in on presentations like this, but I wouldn't trust AI, and I certainly do not trust those big tech companies. I avoid them as far as I can. So I've found this, you've just reinforced my beliefs. Thank you.
I'm I'm very glad to have been able to do that, and I hope we can make something positive
Yeah.
from it. It's yeah, it's a very. I mean,
Well, I these,
there are lots. We could have a long conversation, but I'll just pick up on a couple of things.
yeah,
My first boss, when I went to work in London, it was at King's College Hospital. My first boss was a woman, and people said, "Oh, you don't want to be working for a woman." She was brilliant.
yes,
Um, so that's one data point. There've been other good ones since then as well. And another thing is my daughter had a hip smashed in a car accident as well, so that really touched a nerve. He did survive. He has had
yes,
5 children, but to see a 17-year-old lying flat on a hospital bed for 6, unable to move, not
yeah.
being allowed to move, was something I will never forget. Anyway, so it's I'm glad you like the talk. Thank you. Is there any chance of making the volume louder? I'm finding it quite difficult to hear. I've got everything turned up at my end, but
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think that's down to your equipment, I have to say. You're very clear. Um, yeah, sorry.
okay, I'll listen carefully then, but hmm,
Okay, are there any other questions?
Just wanted to thank you again for the very informative and entertaining presentation as well. I guess my comment would be, as you said, there, yeah, with big tech, I think it's often seen as a safe choice, especially with kind of management circles. There's that old mantra that nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, or so they used to say. Uh,
mm,
so. I think gradually there is slightly more recognition, more amongst the probably tech circles of open source. How can we kind of break down some of the barriers where people just think, well, if we go open source, it'll be a headache. We'll need lots of techies, nobody understand it, and then we'll all be screwed.
Mm. Yeah, I remember the he got fired for buying IBM. I mentioned I went to California. I've been working on a VAX VMS system, which was brilliant. We've been running for 9 months. We never had to restart it. It did everything we wanted. And I went to the one in America. They're running on IBM machine, and it would crash 5 times a day. And I said, why are we using that? They said, well, yeah, the others are all completely unreliable. And so that kind of IBM was really pioneered that kind of selling to managers and somehow convincing them that they're credible when they're not. I think I think if as those of us who are technicians uh, need to do the very best job we can anyway, but also to help counter that. And I really think um, managers of managers who have buying decisions should be educated in um, in just what it is they're looking at,
Yeah.
because usually they're not, or they tried programming and didn't like it or something. So yeah, I wish I had the answer, but I think those two things
Thank you.
would be promising if we could make it happen. Well, we can improve our own work, and
Yeah.
and I've met lots of people who do, lots of really good developers.
Thank you.
I do have a query thinking about it. I volunteer in the Science and Industry Museum 1 day a week on what is known as the Manchester Baby. And we get lots of school parties in. It appears that the very young people are now learning programming at some schools, not all of them. And I'm just wondering where that particular code is coming from. I've never been able to pin it down. I know some of the kids are brilliant at binary. And I'm aware the BCS has been asking for people to volunteer, but I'm conscious that it's so long since I last earned my living in IT, I am out of date. What should these schools be learning? I mean, I think it's a program where they've got Lego bricks, and each piece of Lego is a different type of instruction. And they can, one I was shown, there was a chicken, they could make it run. And when it got to the end of the screen, it was standing there running. So a brick was added so that it turned round and ran back. And then another one so that it went up the screen. All pretty clever, but what was it, and is it of any use? I don't know.
Uh, yeah, I don't know what to say.
No.
But thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a small question. You say, Ron, that we should avoid big tech.
Can
Uh,
you speak up as much as you can, please?
okay, sorry. You say, Ron, that we should avoid big tech, but to counterbalance that, what about going with the small tech firms that suddenly go bust? Do you have any comments on that area?
I mean, choosing a good supplier is difficult, and um, I know I've seen quite a few who do really good work, and I would always get references and challenge them. And yes, it can go wrong, but if the big tech ones are going wrong half the time, I don't know if they all are, but the Microsoft ones that my knowledgeable consultant friend had come across, if they fail half the time, then these organizations are losing loads of money. I know 3 charities that have cancelled their Microsoft systems after spending, in all cases, over £1 million. They don't get a refund. It didn't do what they wanted, but they don't get a refund. So it's not risk-free. And it's the same with the big consultancies, because they put their best people on the sales team. So you listen to the sales team, you think, hey, these people are really good. Then you get someone who comes along and one example that amused me, if you was charities get lottery funds. So they had this guy come along, and he worked really hard, but he was always exhausted. He'd been working 7 days a week ever since he went to work for that consultancy. And so they needed a random number generator. Well, Excel has a good one in it. Most of the databases have good ones in them. Java has a good one in it. They're all based on the Donald Knuth book, where he talks 115 pages on random numbers. And this kid had never heard of that. And I say he's probably in mid-20s. And so he decided to write one. And, his manager didn't stop him. We pointed out the stupidity of it. And of course, it didn't work. But employing this guy from one of the really big consultancies, the argument is you've got backup from the big company. I've never seen it. I don't know what you have to do to get that backup, because they've got all their best people trying to sell things. So I think big tech solutions are risky, and if you do lose, you'll lose a lot of money. Small tech can be very risky too. You need to be careful who you choose and make sure you talk to people that they've developed something for, which means it's hard for them to get started, but that's life. But really, it's not a foregone conclusion that a big tech company will be safer. I think it's probably the opposite.
Okay, and would you advocate open source, open architecture, those sorts of things?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that at all.
I said, would you advocate open source, and open architecture, and those sorts of things?
Absolutely. Yes. So my systems are all now Linux. I got fed up with Microsoft Windows a long time ago. I got fed up with Apple when they started copying the same things, and also became very unreliable. So I use Linux operating system. Postgres is one of the most popular databases, is also very fast, very reliable, and free. You can get free version control. You can get free wiki software, free compilers, of course, for the languages, and the generally the big tech solutions products are not as good either. I worked a lot with ETL systems. I worked with all the major ones, and they were all dire, really inefficient. They look great when you've got 5 boxes on the screen, but when you've got a real system, they're completely unmanageable. You can manage it in plain text, SQL code, shell scripts. You need discipline with those. You need to store them in a version control system. You need to have automated testing. That's another thing you can get for free. And that open source, those open source systems are great. When I've raised a bug with them, I mean, they're falling over themselves. I mean, thousands of people must be, contacting them all the time. But to be helpful, you raise a bug the big tech companies, they, you're lucky if they even acknowledge it, let alone fix it. So, yeah, I'm really impressed with the open source community, and I'm using it more and more.